Welcome everyone to the Stanford Graduate School of Business alumni panel for the Western region. I'm going to go ahead and just get started talking about what you guys can expect today. As I mentioned at the beginning, my name's Elisa Koppel. I'm a member of the MBA admissions team here at Stanford. I'm joined today with 5 panelists, and the focus today is on hearing the perspectives of folks who are residing in currently the Western region of the United States. So we'll get to hear firsthand experiences of people who have been to the GSB. This session specifically is 45 minutes long, just to set some expectations. We'll start off with introductions with our panelists and then open it up for Q&A. So I will be looking at the Q&A pod for questions and trying to moderate a discussion amongst with our panelists. This will be 45 minutes. We'll do some introductions. And like I said, feel free to submit questions throughout. I will end this session talking about other types of events that we offer, but today we're going to really jump right into questions and answers with our panelists. If you're looking for more information on our program, on admissions criteria and things like that, we do have info sessions that we offer throughout the summer, the next few months, and we encourage you to check on our events page for more. But I will talk about more of those events at the end of this. So again, thank you everyone to joining today. We are so excited to have you for this panel. Because this is a session that is focused on the Western region, and we have panels this summer focused on regions, focused on industries, and I wanted to share, because this is the Western region, a bit of information about our class of 2021 profile. As you can see, about 66 countries are represented in the GSB class, so an incredibly global class of students. We have about 420 students in each class. But again, today's focus is the Western region, and as you'll see, incoming in class of 2021, about 64% of students were from the United States. I want to take some time to have each of our panelists today introduce themselves. We're joined, like I said, by 5 great panelists. I'm very excited to have all of them here today to share their perspectives. I'm going to ask each of them to go around and state their name, their class year, and if each of you could share perhaps your favorite academic experience. So maybe a class project, faculty, what was your favorite academic experience when you were at the GSB? And we'll have each of you answer that, and then we'll get started with more questions. So Norris, why don't we start with you?
Great, thanks Lisa for the introduction. So again, my name is Norris, and I graduated class of 2019. And one academic program I really liked was the STEP, or Stanford Singapore Exchange program I did in the summer of fall of 2018. And that was really cool because I got to learn about TikTok on ByteDance before it became super huge in the United States.
Awesome, thanks. Sunny, why don't we go next with you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sunny Kumar. I'm a graduate of the MBA program as well as the MD program from Stanford. My favorite academic experience was leading a GST, a global study trip to Greece, where we looked at how the economic crisis from 2009 affected their healthcare system, even more relevant today as we're all facing another healthcare crisis and learning how to adapt in this situation.
Great, thank you. Marlo, I know you're on by phone, and we'd love to have you introduce yourself.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. This is Marlo. Apologies again that I don't have video, but quick background on me, class of 2016. I currently work in private equity now in Los Angeles, and I think my favorite academic experience was actually probably taking the search fund class and learning a little bit about almost a micro private equity type world, and combined with entrepreneurship. I think it was a really interesting way to learn about business.
Great, thank you. Mariana, why don't you go next?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Mariana from 2013 class. I work at Facebook now as a product manager, and my favorite academic experience For me, it was the electronic business class with Jaime Mendelson. I know it sounds so basic, but I come from the East Coast and I didn't really know enough about tech, and it really opened my eyes. And I remember our final exam was about Airbnb, and I was like, this is crazy. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the biggest business ever. So it was really great exposure.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. And Vidya, we'll have you introduce yourself now.
Everyone, I'm Vidya. I graduated from the GSB in 2012, and now I'm up in Seattle working for the Strategic Investment Fund at the Gates Foundation. My favorite academic experience at the GSB was the Biodesign Innovation class, which I hope they're still teaching, I'm not sure, which is kind of an interdisciplinary class between the business school, medical school, and a bunch of the engineering programs. Where you basically have like a specific medical need that you choose, and you develop a medical device together, kind of go through the entire process of kind of the design process to come up with something and figure out the regulatory pathway. And my team, the year that I did it, they were focused on global health needs, and I got to basically develop a saliva-based diagnostic for neonatal jaundice. It was just such a cool experience, and like working across people with several backgrounds. So I love that.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. I see actually a question that's a great follow-up to you guys sharing your favorite academic experience. We got asked really about the leadership courses and leadership curriculum at the GSB. I was wondering if maybe one or two of you could share of the leadership courses that you maybe took, whether it was leadership labs or an elective that you took, or executive challenge. This is a question from Andrew Hugh. What was most transformative for you, and really how did it help you develop your leadership skills? So kind of a follow-up academic question. Why don't we start with Norris to answer that?
Sure. So one thing about leadership labs that I've taken with me, it's pretty basic. It's like the action impact feedback format. And in our startup, we have monthly climate checks where we actually utilize that. And it seems to be a pretty good way where you get specific information about something you did and how it impacts others. Pretty simple, but it's often people forget that, you know, they don't actually know what you did to make them feel that way. So it's good to remember that.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. Sunny, could you share about leadership, perhaps something that helped you develop your leadership skills or helped kind of on your transformation through business school?
Absolutely. For me, the most impactful academic experience I had related to leadership was a course called Interpersonal Dynamics that many of you may be familiar with. The core nature of this course is to help you in a small group learn how to communicate more effectively and in a different style than I think most people are aware of. Coming from a medical background, we often are in positions where we're delivering hard news, challenging news, but I actually think unequivocally the best communication experience and learning I got was from interpersonal dynamics during my entire tenure at Stanford.
Awesome, thanks. I see another question out there just about career pivoting, and when we shared the screen for a few of you, there were some of you who did pivot in your careers. I'd love to hear from, we'll start with Mariana about what you were doing before the GSB and maybe how the GSB helped you prepare for what you wanted to do after, and then I'd also love for Marlo to follow up and answer that too, but we'll start with Mariana.
Yeah, so career pivoting is very common. Before business school, I was in consulting and private equity, and I thought I was going to go back to private equity afterwards. So that's what I was gearing myself towards. I actually ended up switching into tech. Now I work at Facebook. And a lot of that just came from exposure. Like, I think that's one of the best things about Stanford is that the alumni come back, obviously. And in courses, you hear from a lot of folks who are, you know, running major companies in different industries. And so it gave me a lot more perspective. So being on the East Coast, for me, finance and consulting were the biggest and most important industries. And then I come to the West Coast and I realized actually there's a whole other world out there. And so for me, it was gaining exposure to, you know, the industry of tech, and then narrowing, once I figured out that's where I wanted to go, things that helped were coursework, just to get like the survey of all the things. And then the internship is basically like a free pass to do anything. So I contacted this founder who I know asked to be his number 2 and basically just followed him around the world for my summer. And that's how I figured out like it was definitely the industry for me. And so you know, I think it's pretty common. I'd say keep an open mind and don't be surprised if you go in thinking one thing and then end up doing something entirely different afterwards.
Great, thank you. Marlo, do you want to answer that too? I know you pivoted when you came to business school too.
Sure. So before business school, I was in consulting on a kind of very traditional path to return to consulting, then got to the GSB and similarly got exposed to a bunch of new people, a bunch of new ideas, and realized I was actually really interested in investing. And so I was pretty fortunate that realized that fairly early and ultimately worked with the Career Center to pursue an internship in private equity on the East Coast, had a great experience, realized it was what I wanted to do kind of full-time after the GSB, and so ultimately decided to go down that path. And so I've been in Los Angeles doing private equity for the last 4 years, kind of building upon some of what I learned in my internship, and really glad that I got the chance over that 3-month period to try out a different career, because I think otherwise, as much as I really enjoyed consulting, I think it's been exciting to make a change.
Great, thanks you guys. There's actually a question from Anna in the audience. She's kind of piggybacking off of this career pivoting question. So I'll follow up with Mariana and Marlo, but then probably have someone else chime in. That really is about how many of you came to business school with the intent to pivot, and how many of you were exposed to something while here? And so many of you are doing such different things out there that I'd love to hear, you know, a follow-up to Mariana and Marlo, but then maybe also Vidia, you could chime in here too. So Mariana, why don't you, it sounded like you were exposed to things as you came, so maybe you didn't have the intent of pivoting, but if you could share more of what you were thinking as you came into business school.
Yeah, I did not intend to pivot. So I was in private equity and I expected to remain in private equity, but just in a different geography and a different scale. When I got to business school, I basically figured out that I wanted to create. And like for me, I got value from like actually creating things that without me in the world wouldn't exist. And I wasn't getting that from investing. And so it just became like really clear where I was getting my energy from. And I think it's been a good barometer in my life is, you know, what drains your energy, what gives you energy. And so you can try on a few things. And the way to try things on in business school is, you know, through coursework, through your peers. So like almost everyone has done a career that, you know, could be interesting for you. And so just by talking to folks in your class, you can get a sense for what it's really like and ask honest questions, because no one has a vested interest in lying or persuading you one way or another. You know, you're there with them for 2 years. Like most people aren't trying to push you one way or another. So it's a really good safe space to get that background. And then going into sort of what I did after school, I started my own company, which gave me sort of a lot of different functions within tech. And then when I switched into Facebook, I narrowed even further into product. So, you know, it's not a straight line, but Stanford helped me to figure out like, what's the general playing field? Okay, where within that do I want to play? Okay, why? And then the Launchpad to pursue it.
Awesome, thank you. Marlo, maybe you could chime in and then we'll go to Vidia.
Perfect. Yeah, I would say mine was somewhat exposure-based as well. I mean, I had a combination of kind of meeting classmates and putting faces to the career with respect to something I'd heard of but didn't know quite as much about until I met individuals who were in that path or had come from that path. I also took a couple courses. I took a couple investing classes. I took some financial modeling classes. I also joined some clubs. I was in a couple investing clubs, a private equity club and whatnot. And I think that helped also just sort of surround me with new ideas that made me realize that was something I was interested in.
Excellent. Vidia, I know you also switched careers and pivoted. When you came, was that kind of a goal of yours to pivot when you started at the GSB?
Yeah, I think for me, there was definitely intent to pivot. So my background before coming to the GSB is I worked in kind of traditional finance in New York at Goldman, first starting on the investment banking side, then working within the kind of prop hedge fund. And I knew when I was doing that I was like gaining skills, but I wanted to apply those skills somewhere very different in the course of my career. But found that when you work that many hours a day or a week, you can't really spend a lot of time thinking about the transition. And for me, my passion area had always been around international development. And I think through actually my time at Goldman, I gained a lot of interest in healthcare. So I became interested in global health. But the problem that I faced was there's like a bazillion things you can go do in global health. And I have this like particular set of skills that relates to kind of understanding companies and how the private sector works. And so how do I figure out what that right role is for me? So I came into business school with the intent to explore that. So not knowing what the answer would be, but wanting to look at, you know, maybe working for the government or multilateral agencies, maybe working for companies on the ground or for US companies that were kind of trying to send innovation over there, and maybe staying in the investment field, which is a function I really liked, but having that investment be much more kind of geared towards bringing innovation to the developing world. And I did my internship at the Gates Foundation, which I feel so grateful to have been at Stanford, because that year, when 2011, my summer, was the first year they offered an internship. And the only places they offered it were Stanford Business School and UW, just because actually the CEO of the Gates Foundation at that time was a Stanford alum. That was like the only reason. It was very fortuitous. And I actually did my internship totally out of investing, focused on global health, got a lot of exposure, and found this team that I now work on, which was kind of the perfect combination of the skills and the interests, and found my way there. But I also did a lot of like searching, like the other said, in classes and projects and G-mixes, which are like the small internships you can do over the summer. I worked in India. So it was just like a great kind of test ground, I think, to try different things.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. I'd love for Sunny to chime in here with about intent to pivot, but I'm gonna broaden it a bit for you specifically. We have a few questions in the audience about dual degrees and coming to the GSB and kind of how is that possible. So I'd love for you to share when you decided doing a dual degree was the right thing for you, and just what your intent or original thinking was at that time, and maybe how it played out as you went to business school.
Sure, absolutely. I'll give you guys a little bit of context in that when I came to Stanford, I knew that the entire university was well known for having a lot of support for dual degrees. At the medical school, almost every student does not graduate in the traditional 4 years. They take at least 1 year to do something else. And when it came time for me to make that decision, I did not actually know that I was going to be business school. I wanted to explore, and the primary thing I was motivated by was I wanted to expand my horizons. I knew medicine very well. I knew clinical research very well. Many of my colleagues continued to double down on that. I knew I wanted to do something else. So when I was in clinical rotations, I found that there's just such a big divide between how physicians think medicine should be practiced and how healthcare administrators actually implement medical practice. And I wanted to get to the bottom of that gap. And I thought the best way to do so would be to get a business school education, build out that experience, return to clinical practice, and then be able to kind of navigate both sides of it. Of course, I think as Mariana said, it was not a straight line path for me. There were many twists and curves along the way, but perhaps the most impactful thing about doing a dual degree at Stanford was that it just gave me such a broad exposure to so many things outside of my specific specialty, which was clinical medicine. And as a result, I had the opportunity to intern in venture capital, to found a business of my own, to work on a number of different actually global health projects. And at the end of that, for me, the biggest thing was, where can I have the biggest impact, the most outsized impact? And at least early in my career, I thought the best way for me to do that would be to go into venture capital and have the opportunity to fund healthcare technology startups that can bring tech that's much needed into healthcare into the ecosystem much faster and much more efficiently.
Excellent, thank you so much. There was a question in the audience specifically around entrepreneurship and starting ventures from being at the GSB. And Norris, I'd love for you to share a bit more about your journey so far, from kind of aerospace engineering, pre-GSB, to starting a company. How did the GSB specifically equip you and help you along that journey? And why did you decide to go to business school given that goal?
Oh, cool. Yeah. So for me, it's been a pretty long journey to start the company that I have now, which is sort of the supersonic commercial aviation company. Uh, it just I started it. Well, I had the idea when I was in like high school or so. But it was just generally about faster flight. I even wrote my admissions essay for GSB about it. And so a lot of my career path, including my studies as an aerospace engineer, led to that. And so going to the GSB was really the final step for me to really start this company because I gained a lot of industry experience that I knew what the solution was to faster travel and then just needed to start a company. And so I went to GSB because of a number of factors. One, kind of like what Sunny said, it has a very strong departments across the entire campus, not only business school, in his case, medicine, in my case, the aerospace engineering department. And that's where I went to actually find my co-founder who I work with today. So that's one element. Secondly, of course, the GSB is really great because of the classes, the professors, the students, and all of them helps in some way or another. I can be more specific if you want about in helping me. And in addition to that, the location is really great. Like I could literally bike to several VC offices between classes, after class, or on the weekends or whatever. And that made it very convenient to actually go talk to a lot of VCs, establish that relationship with them. There are some sacrifices, of course, with starting a company during business school. I spent a lot of time building a business, which I basically started in the first 2 weeks of school. So I didn't really do classes as well as I could have. And my social life, I had to prioritize my significant other over my social life in that regard.
Excellent. Norris, could you share one of the more specific ways in which you really felt supported or kind of transformed on your journey, something that really helped you accomplish your goals with starting a company? You mentioned that you could be more specific. You know, was it a class? Was it a club activity? Was it something that you did?
Yeah, it's really hard to pinpoint just one thing because I mean, there's like tens of things at GSB that really helped me build the company, right? I mean, one was just finding my co-founder, which is, of course, a very monumental part of it. And I simply just did that by emailing some students over there and got in touch with the right person. But one thing I'll mention is a professor on campus, and he was on a board member of an airline. And then I met him through a micro econ professor who just, you know, he was talking about airlines and I was like, hey, I want to talk more about airlines. He's like, oh, you should meet this professor. And I did. And then he's introduced me to several executives at the airline that he was a board of because of that. And some of them still I'm in contact with and have remained advisors to my company. That's one specific
That's great.
way that GSB helps.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I saw some questions out there, both from Nurjar and Michael, and a few other questions related to clubs and extracurricular activities. So I'd love to maybe start with Sunny with if you could share, you know, what extracurriculars were you involved in, and perhaps I know a challenge of many students is just that there are so many. So perhaps not only which ones were you involved in, but what were the ones that were most meaningful to you during your time at the GSB?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you opened it up appropriately and said probably the most challenging thing about the GSB is just there's so many opportunities that it does feel like you're drinking from the fire hose until everyone kind of figures out what their appropriate steady state is. And for me, I chose a couple of specific activities that were helpful. One was just choosing to be in a couple of industry groups that I thought would give me, again, that broad exposure I was looking for. So ended up joining way too many to begin with, but ended up whittling it down to a list that I felt was directly relevant to what I would want to do, which included the tech, the healthcare, and the venture capital group. I also mentioned earlier that I led a trip to Greece that was probably one of the more intense, but one of the most rewarding experiences I had, and that I got to take 20 of my fellow GSB classmates to Greece to understand the healthcare ecosystem there. And then I also got involved in student government. I was the social chair of the student committee and was able to give back a little bit to the community by using Stanford-sponsored funds to throw events, parties, activities that really were able to meet the entire needs of the community. Everything from your big parties and dances, but also events for children, families with children, such as a Halloween trick-or-treating event. So it was a great way to get exposed to a very broad set of the community that I may have not otherwise interacted with if I just pursued my academic interests.
Awesome, thank you. I'd love to hear more about extracurriculars, just because there were so many questions out there about them. So Marlo, could you also share perhaps what was one of your more meaningful extracurricular activities?
Sure. So a couple I think of. I know I mentioned one, which is that I was involved in a couple investing clubs. Outside of that, I also actually helped form a new club with a couple friends who I met first year, which was a really cool experience. So we started a Stanford chapter of what was called the Adam Smith Society, which is kind of a free market oriented club that had some chapters in other areas. And it was a really cool experience. We got a lot of support from the school to get that started. We actually are, I think, second year, won an award for kind of best new chapter, which was exciting. And had a decent cohort of people who were involved. We had speakers come through and whatnot. And it was a very cool experience to see something kind of net new brought to the school.
Awesome, thank you. There are a couple panelists, Hannah and Saran, who have specifically questions to Mariana that we want to follow back up on about just pivoting into tech and product management. So I'd like to know from you just what courses really helped you hone in on product management, perhaps. And then also you mentioned you had started your own company afterwards. So similar to Norris, the question of just what helped you from the GSB kind of go down that path? How were you supported, whether it was classes, faculty, classmates, just your experience in terms of pivoting careers, but also specifically into tech and product management?
Yeah, so becoming a founder came first, and I sort of figured out that within all the things you can do in tech, product's most interesting for me through that experience. So becoming a founder, it sort of came through a few things. So one is that e-business class, just like learning about the survey of tech companies and how to sort of splice through the ecosystem. Two was that internship I mentioned. And then from there sort of came in a flurry. One of the most important classes was Lean Launchpad with Steve Blank. And so in that class, it's across a few schools. So you pair up with folks who might come from the engineering school or other graduate programs, and your job is just to build a business. And so through the course of the class, you come up with an idea with your team, and then you're just pivoting constantly. So like every 2 to 3 weeks, you're iterating on your idea, you're in the field talking to customers constantly. And that class is really eye-opening because you learn how to be scrappy. Like one of Steve Blank's points was that if you never get kicked out of a store, you really aren't trying hard enough. Where it's like, you just need to do these very scrappy, crazy things in order to figure out how to get things off the ground. And so that helped to sort of catapult me into becoming a founder. At the time, we had a program where for a few months after graduating, you could actually have an office on campus. So I actually worked out of an office at the GSB for a while, which was great. And then from there, I ran my company, and in the sort of flow of what I was doing, I was doing all the roles, helping with design, helping with Ing, because I had the Ing background, helping with product, helping with sales. And I figured out that I liked product the most, just what gave me energy. And so when I decided to switch into Facebook, I pursued product and marketing. And thank goodness for me, I don't think I'd be the greatest marketer in the world. I ended up finding a great fit with product. But I think we now have more coursework dedicated to product. It's a really exciting space. It's a very sort of made up career. Like it didn't exist the way it is now 20 years ago. And so it's one where, having a lot of flexibility and the ability to really think on your feet goes a long way, which is a lot of what you learn in business school. And also part of it, to be honest, like one of the key skills that I gained that's really helpful is being able to confidently make something up on the spot. Because I have to project confidence all day long. And like, I normally know exactly into all details, what's going on. But There's some times where it's like you're making what I call a 49-51 decision. There's a 49% chance this and a 51% chance it's that. But no matter what call you make, you need to drive your team forward in that path. And those are the hard ones. And so for those 49-51s, you know, being able to sort of on the spot, you know, explain, help the team to become confident behind that idea goes a long way. And that's something that I learned through, you know, a series of debates and other coursework at Stanford.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. We have a question from Marielle, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Just what is the role of the GSB in the lives of our panelists post GSB? So how have you been involved afterwards? And I first, again, point out they're all here as panelists, which is an awesome way for them to be involved and give back. But because this is the Western region, I'd love to have Vidya start by answering this question and talk about perhaps the alumni community up in the Pacific Northwest and the Seattle area where you're based. And then we'll have someone else share, you know, what it's like in a different part of the West Coast.
Sure. I might take that question differently than how you directed me, if that's okay, Lisa.
Sure.
We do have an alumni presence up here. There are events that happen from time to time, like talks, and we have like a summer event every year, et cetera. And I definitely take part in those, but I actually feel like the way the GSB shows up in my life now is pretty separate from that, which is primarily like the community of my class. And a kind of a few specific sub-communities. So there's one thing that kind of grew organically is there's a group of about 10 of us from my class who all have a deep passion for international development work and social issues. And we formed a group back in like 2013 or something, and have been getting together in person once a year. And 5 of those people live in sub-Saharan Africa, 5 live in the US, and we still get together in person once a year, and we have several kind of meetings throughout the year where we choose an organization to back, an area we want to learn about, et cetera. And they're just like very, very close friends. So that's been an amazing community just in terms of shared interests, and also we help each other career-wise. The other thing that's been amazing just in the last month or so is all of the stuff that's going on right now around systemic racism and social unrest here in the US. My entire class of 2012 has come together in this like massive WhatsApp group around Black Lives Matter, and has really been activating each other and finding resources and finding actions that we can take collectively, both with the GSB and kind of outside in our communities. And that's actually just been phenomenal, like to connect with people that way and have so many leaders that have a lot of power out in the world, trying to kind of activate themselves to make a difference. So it shows up a lot, and it's the most powerful part of going to the GSB is your classmates, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's go back to perhaps Marlo, who's in Los Angeles, so also in kind of non-Bay Area. If you could tell us how the GSB shows up in your life post-GSB.
Absolutely. So maybe from a macro perspective, similarly to what Vidya said, my class is very close. We have all different sorts of programming and interaction points. We even during COVID started doing twice a month sort of career talks where people on Saturday mornings talk about what they do and some of the interesting things about it, just to continue to give people interesting ideas of career paths, which I think is really cool. That just sprung up. And then more on the local front, I mean, we have actually a pretty vibrant LA community. Thinking about even tonight, my class is having a get together to celebrate one of our classmates who's finishing residency today. And there's a number of us, you know, obviously a small group that would potentially get together, but pretty cool that we have a tight-knit community down here that we have, you know, especially during times where we're allowed to see each other, birthday parties and get-togethers and book clubs and stuff like that, which I think is cool, especially removed from the Bay Area.
Awesome, thanks. And then I'd love maybe Mariana, if you could chime in as representing the Bay Area. I know there's 3 of you, but just kind of what role does the GSB play in your life as an alum?
Yeah, I'm lucky that I'm super close. I think it depends on time. So the first year after, the GSBers who were in the Bay Area hung out constantly. Like I think I'd see a GSBer probably every other day. Like we were really, really, really tight. It's waned over time, so now I have like a select group of folks who are actually across my class and Vidia's class who I hang out with a lot, just like my friend group. And then otherwise, I just see people very often. Companies in the Bay Area are just absolutely filled with GSBers, including the one I work with now. And so I just in normal course come across GSBers. In terms of formal programming, my class has we used to do an annual football game. So a massive cookout and then go to the game together. And we'd have a DJ playing, we'd have caterers come in. It was this big deal. Obviously, I don't think that's happening this year. But otherwise, honestly, in the Bay Area, it just happens pretty organically because GSBers are everywhere. And so that's been my experience.
Awesome, thank you. I'm gonna direct this next question to Norris as the most recent graduate of the program. Jordan out in the audience asked, just how did classes adapt to stay relevant to perhaps what may have been going on in the world or in business at that time? Did you experience anything like that where there was innovation taking place in the classroom itself by the course offerings?
I'm probably not going to answer the question the way you hoping. So I was really curious about what GSB was doing with COVID-19. And so I actually knew a professor who I reached out to for some other stuff, and I asked if I can participate in class. And so he did, of course, a lot of lectures are on Zoom, and he did his lecture on Zoom. And that was one way that he adapted the class. And I thought it was actually really well done. And having taken the course both in person and online, I actually noticed very little decrease in quality. There was still audience or student participation. They brought in a guest speaker as well. And then the guest speaker was really engaging, answered a lot of student questions as well. And they did a case review. So talk about adaptation. I mean, that was just done on the fly in a couple of weeks. And that was not just one professor, but it was en masse across the entire program. So that's one way.
Yeah, just to echo on that, it is something that happened very quickly, and that's great to hear that you were able to take part in that and see that experience. Perhaps we could have someone else chime in about that, just about the courses offered during that time and their relevancy to that time. Maybe Sunny, you could chime in if there were any courses you saw developed or offered that were specific to just changes happening in business or the world at that time.
Yeah, I think one of the major things that I saw and was actually a part of was expanding the GSB's healthcare offerings. Healthcare is an industry that's growing tremendously quickly, and it has been for a while, but especially from the business side, the tech side, which Stanford is so good at excelling. They've been able to bring together even more expertise in the area. And I think that's actually shown up in either directly as a result of or as part of student demand. At least in my class, I know that the healthcare club was one of the largest groups that was active from a industry focus. And what I found was that the GSB was very responsive, and that if they get demand from the students to explore a new area, find faculty support, launch programs, launch clubs, you can, as long as you have student interest, you can almost always get something off the ground. And I absolutely saw it happen in real time with healthcare offerings at the GSB.
Awesome, thank you. I see a few questions that relate to just kind of the general why the GSB, and this is a really broad question. We only have a few minutes left, but I would love to pose that out to we'll start maybe with Vidya, just about kind of not just why the GSB, because you've touched on that a little bit already, but also how did you know it was the right time for you to apply to business school? We're seeing a few questions out there around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably as many answers to this question as people that you talk to, because it's such a personal decision. In terms of timing, I think for me, again, like I mentioned before, I kind of knew I wanted to gain a certain skill set that was around you know, understanding how companies work and understanding how you can well run an organization and then go and apply that in the field of international development. And I felt I had accumulated a certain number of like years and experiences out there in the private sector, and I was kind of ready. I just kind of felt like it was like, okay, the marginal return of like another year, another couple years versus going and actually doing what I want to do isn't worth it. And so I was, I think 4 years out when I went to the GSB. So that motivated the timing. It was gut feel. I mean, who knows if it was the right decision. And then in terms of why Stanford, for me, there was one personal factor, which is my now husband was getting his PhD at Stanford. So that was an attractive feature of being back in the same place. But that actually wasn't the primary motivator. I think I could have easily like moved out and gotten a job in the Bay Area if we just wanted to be in the same place. I think for me, it was really the combination of things that Stanford was kind of really exceptionally known for. So one was the interdisciplinary nature of all the schools, knowing I wanted to work kind of in healthcare and innovation, that was hugely attractive. And really, I think was really true. Like what everyone says is even more true once you get there. I think too, a lot of focus really on personal growth and kind of developing as a leader, which I didn't get that vibe necessarily from other schools that I looked at, and is like the most important thing to invest in, I think, in ourselves at that time period before we kind of go on to other roles. And lastly is just kind of like the innovation spirit. I think that's part of Stanford, which now is like so well known and was well known at that time too, but I think there's just something really special there about how you want the world to be. You have the ability to create, and that is like just such a cool thing to be around, even if it's people that are, you know, I'm not in tech, but it's cool to be around people that are doing that in tech. So it's like a combination of all those things that felt really special, and talking to folks that had been there that validated that.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Vidya. So you guys, we have 3 minutes left. I do want to wrap up with one question that I'll direct towards two of you, which is we've had a lot of folks out there ask questions around just admissions advice and just general things like that. And we do have information sessions that focus a bit more on the admissions process, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I would love maybe Sunny and then Marlo. So we'll start with Sunny. If you could go back to your pre-GSB self, maybe what is a piece of advice you might give?
Oh, that's a great question. Wow. I think that probably the most important thing that I would give to myself prior to coming to the GSB is absolutely keep an open mind, be willing to take on a broad exposure, but also don't try and do everything. I think the number one thing that at least I ran into, and I know many of my colleagues did, was there's just so much opportunity that being able to narrow it down to what you're passionate about is not easy. It's almost like it's a curse of having too many good options and too many good opportunities to pursue. So while you should absolutely take the opportunity to try many different things, figure out what really calls to you and then spend as much time as you can pursuing that.
Awesome, thanks. And Marlo, anything you would advice you would give to your pre-GSB self?
Yeah, Sunny took mine, which was make the most of the time because there's always so many things to choose from. But I guess the other one I would say too is, I guess along the lines of being open-minded and thinking about looking at coursework or speaking to individuals that might be outside of the realm of the background you came from. I mean, I think about either some of the people that I got exposed to who just opened my eyes to other career paths, other ways of thinking, or even some of the coursework where I took classes that maybe it happened to fit into my schedule at one point, and it turns out it was actually one of the most interesting classes I took, not knowing what things would resonate later. So I think having that breadth and that open-mindedness to kind of using the time to have as many of the experiences as possible while also knowing you won't get to do everything is a good mindset to come in with.
Awesome, thank you so much. With that, I am going to share one more slide just as we close out this session with everyone. I know that we're doing a lot of these events virtually right now at this time, but I do want to share on our campus, we have a cornerstone on the Gun Building, which is one of the buildings on the Night Management Center of the business school. And it reads, dedicated to the things that haven't happened yet and the people who are about to dream them up. So I want to thank our 5 panelists today for joining us. I hope that what you heard from them today was inspirational and motivational and excited you about the GSB and also gave you an idea of what it's like to be a student when you're at the GSB. I did mention that we have a lot of other events offered throughout the summer. So I wanted to encourage everyone who's on this session with us today to check back on our events page on the Stanford GSB admissions events webpage. We have information sessions. These are sessions that include a bit more information about the MBA program and the admissions process. You joined us today for a regional panel. This was the Western region, but we do have industry panels and women's panels and diversity panels throughout the summer. So I encourage you to see the offerings and the dates that we have those on. And then we also have a lot of what we call small group chats at a broader level. You can have a chance to do a small group chat with a meet an AO, an admissions officer like myself or one of my colleagues, or meet a student or meet an alum events. So again, we encourage you to take advantage of these offerings we have online this summer. We're excited to have the opportunity to share information with you and get a chance to meet you virtually. Should you have any follow-up questions from today's session, we've also included our email address and our office hours where you can always call with more follow-up questions if we weren't able to get your specific question answered today. So again, I want to thank Mariana, Marlo, Vidya, Sunny, and Norris. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks to all of you. And we hope to see you again at a future event this summer.